There is a moment that arrives quietly, usually without warning. Perhaps you notice it reaching for something on a high shelf, or walking up a flight of stairs that never used to require thought, or trying to recall a name that was right there a moment ago. It is the moment when you first wonder, is this simply aging? Is this what the coming years will feel like? Most people accept this as inevitable. They assume that slowing down, stiffening up, and fading out is simply the natural order of things. But what if that assumption is hiding something important? What if the gradual decline we attribute to age is not a single process at all, but many processes working together, some of which we misunderstand completely? For decades, medicine has focused on individual numbers. Cholesterol here, blood pressure there. Fix this one thing, the thinking goes, and you have addressed the problem. But the body does not operate that way. It never has. It operates as a conversation, a continuous exchange between every cell and every system. When that conversation breaks down, the symptoms appear. But treating the symptoms without understanding the conversation is like silencing a smoke alarm and calling the fire resolved. There is another way to think about aging. Not as a list of problems to be managed, but as a reflection of deeper patterns that can be observed, understood, and gently guided. And the first step in that guidance is recognizing that the numbers on your lab report are not the final answer. They are simply the beginning of a much more interesting question. You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. A gentle inquiry into the patterns of a well-lived life. There is a question that becomes more interesting with each passing year. It is not a medical question, though medicine has attempted to answer it. It is not a question of genetics, though our genes certainly play a role. It is a question that has occupied philosophers, poets, and grandmothers for as long as humans have gathered around fires and told stories. The question is simply this: why do some people age gracefully while others struggle? Why do some maintain their vitality, their sharpness, their connection to life well into their 9th and 10th decades, while others decline much earlier? If you have lived long enough to be reading this, you already know that the standard answers are insufficient. You have likely known people who followed every rule and died young. You have likely known others who broke every rule and lived to a vigorous old age. You have watched your own body change in ways you did not expect, and in ways that no book quite prepared you for. This is not a guide to living forever. It is not a program for reversing aging or curing disease. It is something more modest and perhaps more useful, an exploration of the patterns that appear again and again in the lives of those who age well. These patterns have been observed across cultures, across centuries, and across thousands of research studies. They are not secrets. They are not breakthroughs. They are simply the accumulated wisdom of human experience, organized into something resembling a coherent picture. What follows is a calm and careful look at what we actually know about the long view of health. It is written for people who want to understand, not for people who want to be told what to do. The decisions, as always, remain your own. Part 1. The body as a conversation. To understand why some people age better than others, it helps to understand something about how the body actually works. This is not a biology lesson in the usual sense. There will be no diagrams to memorize and no Latin terms to pronounce. But there is a simple way of thinking about the body that makes everything else fall into place. The body is not a machine. This is important, because for the last several hundred years, Western medicine has tended to think of the body as precisely that, a collection of parts that can be repaired or replaced when they break. If the heart is clogged, you clean it out. If the knee wears out, you replace it. This approach has produced remarkable achievements, and no one who has benefited from a hip replacement or an emergency surgery should dismiss it. But the machine model has limits. A machine does not heal itself. A machine does not adapt to its environment. A machine does not have conversations with itself. A better way to think about the body is as a conversation. It is a continuous, dynamic, multidirectional exchange of information between every cell, every organ, every system. Your liver talks to your brain. Your gut talks to your immune system. Your fat cells talk to your muscles. This conversation never stops. It happens billions of times per second, and it happens without your conscious awareness. When this conversation flows smoothly, health is the natural result. When the conversation becomes garbled or stuck or overwhelmed, problems begin to appear. This is why the simple approach to health, find the one bad thing and fix it, so often fails. If you have high cholesterol, the machine model says to lower it. But what if the high cholesterol is simply a message from another part of the conversation? What if it is your liver's way of responding to something happening elsewhere? Lowering the cholesterol without understanding the message is like silencing a smoke alarm without checking for fire. The people who age well are not necessarily the people with perfect lab reports. They are the people whose internal conversation remains clear and adaptable. They are the people whose bodies can receive information, process it, and respond appropriately. This capacity for adaptability is what researchers call resilience. And it may be the single most important factor in healthy aging. So when we look at the patterns that follow, it is useful to hold this image in mind. We are not looking for ways to overpower the body or force it into compliance. We are looking for ways to support the conversation, to keep the lines of communication open, to help the body do what it already knows how to do. Part 2. The question of cholesterol and the limits of numbers. Let us take a familiar example to illustrate how this way of thinking changes things. For decades, cholesterol has occupied a central place in the public imagination about heart health. It is one of the most measured, discussed, and medicated substances in all of medicine. And yet, if you ask 10 different doctors what the numbers really mean, you may get 10 different answers. This confusion is not because doctors are uninformed. It is because the relationship between cholesterol and health is far more nuanced than the simple story most people have heard. Cholesterol itself is not a toxin. It is not something the body produces by mistake. Every cell in your body requires cholesterol to function. It is a structural component of cell membranes. It is the raw material from which your body makes vitamin D, stress hormones, and sex hormones. It is essential for the formation of the protective sheath around your nerves. Without cholesterol, you would not survive. The question, then, is not whether cholesterol is good or bad. The question is what the levels of cholesterol in your blood tell you about what is happening elsewhere in the conversation. The standard cholesterol test measures the weight of cholesterol in your blood. It tells you how much is there, but it does not tell you why. It does not tell you what kind of particles are carrying that cholesterol, and it does not tell you what those particles are doing once they arrive at their destination. This is where the metaphor of dump trucks and dirt becomes useful, and it is worth revisiting with a bit more detail. Imagine that cholesterol is the dirt. It needs to be transported from place to place, and it is carried by lipoproteins, which are the dump trucks. A standard cholesterol test tells you how much dirt is in your bloodstream, but it does not tell you whether that dirt is being carried by a few very large dump trucks or by thousands of very small pickup trucks. This distinction matters because the size of the truck determines what it can do. Large, fluffy lipoproteins tend to bounce along the bloodstream without causing much trouble. They are too big to easily penetrate the delicate lining of your artery walls. Small, dense lipoproteins, on the other hand, can slip through more easily. Once they are inside the artery wall, they become vulnerable to a process called oxidation. Oxidation is a chemical reaction that happens when certain molecules are exposed to oxygen over time. It is the same process that causes a cut apple to turn brown or iron to rust. When lipoproteins become oxidized inside the artery wall, they are no longer harmless passengers. They become irritants. The immune system recognizes them as something that should not be there and sends inflammatory cells to deal with them. This immune response is the beginning of plaque formation. So the real question is not simply how much cholesterol you have. It is whether you have the kind of particles that can easily enter the artery wall, and whether those particles become oxidized once they get there. This explains why some people with relatively high cholesterol never develop heart disease. Their cholesterol may be carried in large, fluffy particles that simply bounce along without causing trouble. And it explains why some people with normal cholesterol levels do develop heart disease. Their normal-looking number may be composed of thousands of small, dense particles that are actively contributing to plaque formation. The only way to know which pattern applies to you is through more detailed testing. Advanced lipid panels, available through major laboratories, can measure not just the amount of cholesterol but the number and size of the particles carrying it. These tests have been available for years, but they are not always ordered by doctors who are accustomed to relying on the standard panel. This is one example of a broader principle that will appear throughout this exploration. The numbers on your lab report are not the final answer. They are clues. They are pieces of a larger conversation. The goal is not to get every number into an arbitrary range. The goal is to understand what the numbers are telling you about the underlying patterns of your health. Part 3. The fire below. Inflammation as the common thread. If cholesterol is one piece of the puzzle, inflammation is the piece that connects almost everything else. Inflammation is one of those words that has entered everyday language without always being clearly understood. In its proper sense, inflammation is not a disease. It is a process. It is the body's natural response to injury or threat. When you cut your finger, the area becomes red, warm, and swollen. This is inflammation at work, delivering immune cells to the site of injury to begin healing. Without this ability, even a small scratch could become life-threatening. The problem arises when inflammation becomes chronic. When the inflammatory response is activated not by a specific injury, but by an ongoing condition. It stops being protective and starts being destructive. Instead of a brief, localized response, it becomes a low-grade, body-wide fire that burns continuously. This chronic inflammation has been linked to an extraordinary range of age-related conditions. It is associated with changes in the heart and blood vessels. It is associated with changes in the brain. It is associated with changes in the joints, the metabolism, and even the way cells age at a fundamental level. What lights this fire? The answer is complex, but certain patterns appear consistently. One of the most significant sources of chronic inflammation is a particular type of body fat. The fat that accumulates just beneath the skin, the kind you can pinch with your fingers, is relatively harmless in terms of inflammation. But the fat that accumulates deep in the abdomen, wrapped around the internal organs, is biologically active in a different way. This visceral fat, which creates the apple-shaped profile, does not just sit there. It actively produces inflammatory molecules that circulate throughout the entire body. This is not a moral judgment about body shape or size. It is simply an observation about biology. Visceral fat behaves differently than subcutaneous fat, and its presence is associated with higher levels of inflammation regardless of what the scale says. Another significant source of inflammation is the modern diet, particularly in patterns that involve large amounts of refined carbohydrates and sugars. When blood sugar spikes repeatedly throughout the day, it creates stress on the cells that must handle that sugar. Over time, this stress contributes to a state called insulin resistance, which has its own inflammatory consequences. There is also the question of the mouth. Gum disease, which becomes more common with age, is a persistent bacterial infection that keeps the immune system constantly activated. The inflammation generated by diseased gums does not stay in the mouth. It enters the bloodstream and contributes to the body-wide fire. And then there is the question of the gut. The digestive tract is home to trillions of microorganisms that play a critical role in regulating the immune system. When this microbial community becomes unbalanced, a state researchers call dysbiosis, the gut lining can become more permeable. Small particles can leak into the bloodstream that would normally be contained, triggering an immune response and contributing to inflammation. What makes inflammation so central to the conversation about aging is that it affects virtually every system simultaneously. It is not just about the heart or the brain or the joints. It is about the overall terrain in which all of these systems operate. This is why researchers have become increasingly interested in markers of inflammation as predictors of long-term health. Simple blood tests can measure things like C-reactive protein, which rises in response to inflammation. Studies have shown that people with higher levels of inflammatory markers tend to have worse health outcomes over time, even when their other numbers look good. The lesson here is not that inflammation must be eliminated entirely. That would be impossible and undesirable. The lesson is that the patterns of daily life, what we eat, how we move, how we manage stress, how we care for our teeth and our digestion, all influence the inflammatory environment of the body. And that environment, in turn, influences how we age. Part 4. The sugar connection and the hidden role of insulin. If inflammation is the fire, insulin resistance is often the fuel that keeps it burning. Understanding this connection requires a brief look at how the body handles energy. When you eat carbohydrates, whether from a piece of fruit, a slice of bread, or a spoonful of sugar, your body breaks them down into glucose, which enters the bloodstream. The pancreas responds by releasing insulin, a hormone whose job is to signal cells to open up and let the glucose in. Inside the cells, glucose is used for energy. This system works beautifully when meals are balanced and infrequent. But in the modern world, many people eat carbohydrates constantly throughout the day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks in between. With each meal, insulin rises. With each snack, insulin rises again. Over time, cells that are constantly exposed to high levels of insulin begin to change. They become less responsive to the signal. They start to ignore insulin's knock at the door. The pancreas, sensing that glucose is not being cleared from the blood, responds by producing even more insulin. This is the state of insulin resistance. Normal or even high levels of insulin are required to keep blood sugar in check. Insulin resistance can exist for years or decades without any obvious symptoms. Blood sugar may remain perfectly normal because insulin is working overtime to keep it there. But the high insulin levels themselves have consequences throughout the body. High insulin tells the liver to produce more triglycerides, which are a type of fat in the blood. It lowers the protective HDL cholesterol. It promotes the production of those small, dense LDL particles discussed earlier. It encourages the storage of fat, particularly the inflammatory visceral fat around the organs. It can raise blood pressure by affecting how the kidneys handle sodium. This cluster of changes, high triglycerides, low HDL, small LDL particles, abdominal fat, and elevated blood pressure, is so common that researchers have given it a name: metabolic syndrome. It is not a disease in itself, but a pattern that precedes and predicts a great many diseases. The connection to heart health is particularly strong. Studies have found that a majority of people who experience heart attacks have either prediabetes or diabetes, and many of them were undiagnosed at the time. Their blood sugar may have been normal, but the underlying pattern of insulin resistance was already well established. This is why some researchers suggest that the simple ratio of triglycerides to HDL cholesterol can be a useful marker. A high ratio, generally above 2 or 3, tends to appear in people with insulin resistance, regardless of what their other numbers look like. It is not a perfect test, but it is available from any standard lipid panel and costs nothing to calculate. The deeper lesson here is about the nature of metabolic health. It is not simply about avoiding diabetes. It is about maintaining the body's ability to handle energy smoothly, without the extreme swings and compensatory responses that wear systems down over time. The patterns that support this, spacing meals apart, choosing foods that do not spike blood sugar, moving the body regularly, are the same patterns that appear again and again in the lives of people who age well. Part 5. The particle question. What advanced testing reveals. Given that standard tests can miss so much, it is worth understanding what more advanced testing can reveal. This is not to suggest that everyone needs every test available, but for those who want a clearer picture of their personal patterns, the options exist. Advanced lipid testing goes beyond measuring the weight of cholesterol to measure the actual particles that carry it. The two main options available in the United States are the NMR Lipo Profile from LabCorp and the Cardio IQ panel from Quest Diagnostics. Both provide information that simply cannot be obtained from a standard panel. The most important number on these advanced panels is often the LDL particle number. This is a count of how many LDL particles are circulating in your blood, regardless of how much cholesterol they are carrying. A high particle number is associated with increased risk even when the standard LDL cholesterol number looks normal. Conversely, a low particle number is reassuring even when the standard LDL number looks high. The panel will also tell you about particle size. Some people have predominantly large, fluffy particles, which is considered the less concerning pattern. Others have predominantly small, dense particles, which are more closely associated with plaque formation. This information alone can change how a person's risk is interpreted. Some advanced panels also provide an insulin resistance score, which is calculated based on the pattern of particles. This can reveal metabolic stress long before fasting glucose or even fasting insulin becomes abnormal. It is another example of how looking at the right information can uncover patterns that would otherwise remain hidden. There are other tests that can add useful information as well. Oxidized LDL measures the proportion of LDL that has already undergone the damaging chemical change described earlier. High levels suggest that oxidative stress is actively occurring. Lipoprotein A is a genetic variant of LDL that is associated with increased risk regardless of other factors. Homocysteine is an amino acid that, when elevated, is associated with changes in blood vessels and may reflect inadequate B vitamin status. None of these tests, by themselves, tells the whole story. But together, they can paint a much richer picture than the standard panel alone. They can help distinguish between someone whose cholesterol is high because of a benign genetic pattern and someone whose cholesterol is high because of underlying insulin resistance. They can identify risk factors that would otherwise go unnoticed until something happened. The decision to pursue such testing is personal. Some people prefer not to know. Others find that having more information helps them make more informed choices about how to live. Both approaches are valid. The important thing is to understand that the simple numbers from a standard panel are not the final word. There is always more to the conversation than any single test can reveal. Part 6. The stories we tell ourselves about family history. Few topics in health generate as much confusion as family history. It is common to hear people say, "Heart disease runs in my family, so there's nothing I can do about it." It is equally common to hear people say, "Everyone in my family lived to be 90, so I don't have to worry." Both statements contain a grain of truth and a field of misunderstanding. Family history is real. Certain genetic variations are passed down through generations. And some of these variations influence health outcomes. People with a first-degree relative, a parent or sibling, who had a heart attack at an early age do have a different risk profile than people without such a history. Early age in this context generally means before 55 in men and before 65 in women. But genetics is not destiny. A family history is not a guarantee. It is a piece of information that, like a lab number, needs to be interpreted in context. Consider the story of a man whose father and all 5 of his uncles had heart attacks in their 50s. By any measure, his genetic risk was high. But he worked a physically demanding job that kept him moving all day. And every evening after dinner, he walked through his neighborhood. He lived into his 80s without significant heart problems. His lifestyle did not erase his genetics, but it shifted the expression of those genetics in a more favorable direction. Or consider the opposite pattern, a family where everyone lived long lives, but where everyone also ate the same traditional diet, stayed physically active through daily work, and remained closely connected to community. Was their longevity genetic? Or was it the result of patterns that could be adopted by anyone? The truth is that separating genetics from lifestyle is almost impossible. Families share not just genes, but habits, attitudes, and environments. A family history of longevity may reflect inherited genes, or it may reflect inherited ways of living. A family history of early heart disease may reflect inherited risk, or it may reflect inherited patterns of eating and moving that could be changed. The most useful way to think about family history is as a signal to pay attention. It does not mean you are doomed, and it does not mean you are safe. It means you have information that can help you make decisions. If heart disease runs in your family, you might want to be more thorough in your testing and more attentive to the patterns discussed here. If longevity runs in your family, you might want to study what those long-lived relatives actually did, not just how long they lived. The same principle applies to the common question about whether heart disease is genetic or environmental. The answer is always both. Genes load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. The work of healthy aging is not to change your genes, which you cannot do. It is to create an environment in which your genes can express themselves in the most favorable way possible. Part 7. The quality of food. Beyond nutrients. When the conversation turns to diet, it is easy to get lost in details. Should you eat more fat or less fat? More protein or less protein? Are carbohydrates good or bad? Should you try intermittent fasting or the Mediterranean diet or a plant-based approach? These questions, while reasonable, tend to obscure a simpler and more fundamental truth. The quality of what you eat matters more than any single nutrient ratio. And the patterns that appear consistently across cultures with low rates of chronic disease have more to do with what is present than with what is absent. Consider the traditional diets of places like Okinawa, Sardinia, or Ikaria, regions that have produced unusually high numbers of long-lived, healthy people. These diets are different in many ways. One relies heavily on fish and vegetables, another on beans and greens, another on olive oil and lamb. But they share certain features. They are built around whole foods. The vegetables come from gardens, not factories. The grains, when present, are minimally processed. The meat, when eaten, comes from animals that lived as animals, not from concentrated feeding operations. The fats come from olives, nuts, and fish, not from industrial seed oils. These traditional diets also tend to be lower in sugar than modern diets, though not necessarily sugar-free. People in these regions historically ate sweets as treats, not as staples. They did not consume sweetened beverages throughout the day. Their palates were accustomed to a different range of flavors. Another common feature is variety. Traditional diets are not monotonous. They shift with the seasons, incorporating different foods at different times of year. This variety matters because different plants contain different compounds that support health in different ways. The polyphenol in blueberries are not the same as the polyphenol in coffee or the polyphenol in dark chocolate. Each contributes something unique. There is also the question of what might be called food competence, the ability to select, prepare, and enjoy real food. In traditional cultures, this knowledge was passed down naturally. Children learned to cook by watching their parents. Meals were prepared together and eaten together. Food was embedded in social life, not something consumed alone in front of a screen. This is a very different picture from the way many people eat today, where food is often something that comes in a package and requires nothing more than opening and heating. The shift away from home cooking, which has been dramatic over the last 50 years, may have health consequences that go far beyond the specific nutrients in the food. There is no single perfect diet. There are only patterns that tend to support health and patterns that tend to undermine it. The patterns that support health, eating mostly whole foods, including plenty of plants, limiting sugar, cooking at home, eating with others, are remarkably consistent across cultures and across time. They are not new discoveries. They are simply the accumulated wisdom of how humans have eaten for most of our existence. Part 8. Movement as conversation, not punishment. If food is one pillar of healthy aging, movement is another. But here again, the way we think about it matters. For many people, exercise has become a chore, something to be endured for the sake of burning calories or meeting some external standard. This is unfortunate, because it misses the deeper purpose of movement. Movement is not something the body does to stay healthy. Movement is what the body is designed for. It is a form of communication between muscles, brain, and every other system. When you move, you are not just burning energy. You are sending signals. Your muscles release molecules that travel through the bloodstream and talk to your brain, your liver, your fat tissue. These molecules, called myokines, have effects that researchers are only beginning to understand. They influence inflammation. They influence metabolism. They influence the growth of new brain cells. This is why the health benefits of movement extend so far beyond the obvious. People who move regularly have lower rates of heart disease, certainly, but they also have lower rates of depression, dementia, diabetes, and falls. They maintain their mobility longer. They report higher quality of life. These benefits appear regardless of whether the movement is vigorous or gentle, structured or spontaneous. The key is consistency. The person who walks for 20 minutes every day may be better off in the long run than the person who runs for an hour once a week. The body responds to regular signals, not occasional shocks. Movement needs to be woven into daily life, not saved for special appointments. This is where the traditional view of exercise as something you do at the gym can be limiting. In traditional cultures, movement was not separate from life. It was life. People walked to market, worked in gardens, built things with their hands, danced at celebrations. They did not need to set aside time for exercise because their entire existence involved movement. For those living in modern environments, recreating this pattern requires intention. It means choosing stairs over elevators. It means parking farther from the store. It means walking to talk to a neighbor instead of sending an email. It means gardening, cooking from scratch, cleaning the house without automated help. These small movements, accumulated throughout the day, may matter as much as any structured workout. There is also the question of variety. The body adapts to whatever it is asked to do repeatedly. If you only walk, you maintain the ability to walk, but you may lose the ability to do other things. A well-rounded movement practice includes elements of endurance, strength, balance, and flexibility. This does not mean you need a complicated routine. It means you should occasionally do things that challenge your body in different ways. Lift something heavy. Stretch to reach something high. Stand on one foot while putting on socks. The goal is not to become an athlete. The goal is to maintain the capacity to live the life you want to live. If you want to carry groceries, play with grandchildren, travel, garden, or simply get out of a chair without using your hands, movement is what preserves those abilities. Part 9. The nervous system and the pace of life. There is another system in the body that rarely appears in discussions of healthy aging, yet it influences everything. This is the autonomic nervous system, which operates largely outside conscious control. It has two main branches. The sympathetic nervous system is often called the fight-or-flight response. It is designed for short-term emergencies. When activated, it increases heart rate, raises blood pressure, diverts blood to muscles, and sharpens attention. This is useful when you need to react quickly to danger. It is not useful when it runs continuously. The parasympathetic nervous system is sometimes called the rest and digest response. It slows heart rate, lowers blood pressure, directs blood to the digestive system, and promotes repair and recovery. This is the system that should dominate most of the time. In modern life, many people live in a state of chronic sympathetic activation. The body is in fight-or-flight mode not because of an immediate threat, but because of ongoing stress, financial worries, relationship difficulties, work pressure, news cycles, traffic. The system that evolved to handle occasional emergencies is running all the time. This has consequences throughout the body. Chronic sympathetic activation raises inflammation. It disrupts sleep. It impairs digestion. It contributes to high blood pressure. It accelerates the biological processes of aging. Restoring balance to the nervous system is not about eliminating stress, which is impossible. It is about creating regular opportunities for the parasympathetic system to activate. This is why practices that seem simple, deep breathing, time in nature, gentle movement, moments of quiet, have such profound effects. They are not just pleasant. They are signals to the body that it is safe to shift out of emergency mode. The pace of life matters here. People who rush from one thing to the next, who are always checking devices, who fill every moment with stimulation, rarely give their nervous system a chance to reset. The body was not designed for constant input. It was designed for periods of activity followed by periods of rest. This is one reason why traditional cultures, even those with physically demanding lives, often have lower rates of the chronic diseases that plague modern societies. Their pace of life includes built-in periods of rest. They may work hard, but they also sit and talk, nap in the afternoon, observe days of rest. Their nervous systems are not constantly being asked to perform. For those accustomed to a faster pace, shifting toward more rest can feel uncomfortable at first. The mind may resist, but over time, the body responds. Sleep improves. Mood stabilizes. The sense of being constantly driven begins to ease. These are not trivial changes. They are signs that the nervous system is finding its way back to balance. Part 10. The social body. One of the most consistent findings in all of health research is also one of the most overlooked. People with strong social connections live longer, healthier lives than people who are isolated. This is not a small effect. It is comparable to the effects of smoking, obesity, or physical inactivity. The reasons are not entirely understood, but they likely involve multiple pathways. Social connection influences the nervous system, reducing stress and promoting parasympathetic activity. It influences behavior, as people who eat together often eat better than people who eat alone. It provides practical support, someone to call when help is needed. It gives life meaning, a reason to get up in the morning. Conversely, loneliness is a form of chronic stress. The body of a lonely person may be in a state of low-grade alert, always scanning for threat, never fully at rest. This has measurable effects on inflammation, immune function, and cardiovascular health. The challenge is that social connection becomes harder to maintain with age. Friends move away. Partners die. Retirement removes the built-in social network of the workplace. Mobility limitations can make it harder to get out. The risk of isolation increases precisely when connection matters most. This is why the patterns of healthy aging almost always include attention to social life. It is not an afterthought. It is as important as diet or exercise. People who age well tend to have people. They tend to be embedded in communities. Whether formal or informal, they tend to have regular contact with others. Whether family, friends, neighbors, or fellow volunteers. There is no single formula for social connection. For some, it means living near children and grandchildren. For others, it means belonging to a religious community. For others, it means regular gatherings with friends. For still others, it means caring for a pet, which provides a different kind of connection, but connection nonetheless. The key is that connection must be active. Watching television, even watching it with others, is not the same as interacting. The body responds to real engagement, to conversation, to touch, to shared experience. These are the signals that tell the nervous system it is safe, that tell the body it belongs. In a culture that often celebrates independence and self-sufficiency, this can be a difficult message to hear. But the evidence is clear. Humans are social animals. We are not designed to live alone. The body knows this, even when the mind resists. Part 11. The built environment and the unseen world. There is one more layer to this conversation, and it involves the world around us. The places we live, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the products we use. All of these influence the internal conversation of the body. The study of how environmental factors affect health is complex and still developing, but certain patterns are clear enough to merit attention. Air quality matters. People who live in areas with high levels of air pollution have higher rates of heart and lung disease. The tiny particles in polluted air can enter the bloodstream directly from the lungs, triggering inflammation throughout the body. This is not a theoretical risk. It has been measured in study after study. Water quality matters. Depending on where you live, tap water may contain any number of substances, from industrial chemicals to agricultural runoff to the byproducts of the treatment process itself. The long-term effects of low-level exposure to these substances are not fully known. But the precautionary principle suggests that cleaner water is better. The products we use on our bodies and in our homes matter. Skin is not an impermeable barrier. Many substances applied to the skin are absorbed into the bloodstream. The cumulative effect of years of exposure to the fragrances, preservatives, and other chemicals in personal care products is another area where the science is still catching up. There is also the question of the microbial world. The human body contains trillions of bacteria, viruses, and fungi, collectively known as the microbiome. These organisms live on the skin, in the mouth, and throughout the digestive tract. They are not invaders. They are partners. They help digest food, produce vitamins, train the immune system, and protect against harmful organisms. The composition of this microbial community is influenced by many factors, including diet, medications, and environmental exposures. When the community becomes unbalanced, the effects can be felt throughout the body. There is growing evidence that the microbiome plays a role in inflammation, metabolism, and even brain health. What this means for daily life is not always clear. No one can control every environmental variable, but certain principles may be useful. Choosing whole foods over processed ones tends to support a healthier microbiome. Avoiding unnecessary antibiotics helps preserve microbial diversity. Spending time in nature, digging in soil, being around plants and animals may expose the body to beneficial organisms that are less common in indoor life. The goal is not to live in a bubble. That is neither possible nor desirable. The goal is to be aware that the environment matters, and to make choices that reduce unnecessary exposures while recognizing that absolute purity is an illusion. Part 12. The Art of Integration. If there is a single theme that runs through all of this, it is that nothing operates in isolation. The body is not a collection of independent systems. It is a unified whole, and every part influences every other part. This is why the reductionist approach, find the one problem, fix it with one pill, so often falls short. The person with high cholesterol may also have insulin resistance, which may also be related to inflammation, which may also be influenced by stress, which may also be connected to loneliness. Treating the cholesterol without addressing the rest is like weeding a garden without changing the conditions that allow weeds to grow. The people who age well tend to understand this intuitively. They do not follow a single rule or take a single pill. They create lives that support health across multiple dimensions. They eat well, but not obsessively. They move regularly, but not compulsively. They maintain connections, but not desperately. They rest, but not excessively. This integration is not something that can be achieved by following a program. It is something that emerges over time, through attention and adjustment. It is a process of learning what your particular body needs at each stage of life, and having the flexibility to adapt as those needs change. What works at 60 may not work at 80. The body that could handle a long run and a heavy meal in middle age may need something different later on. The person who could skip sleep without consequence may find that sleep becomes essential. The joints that never complained may begin to speak. The ability to adapt to these changes, to listen to what the body is saying and respond appropriately, may be the most important skill of all. This is also why comparison is so unhelpful. The person next door who seems to eat whatever they want and never exercise may have genetics or circumstances that you cannot see. Their pattern is theirs. Yours is yours. The only useful comparison is between where you are now and where you have been, and between where you are now and where you would like to go. Part 13. The Calm Conclusion. We return, at the end, to the question with which we began. Why do some people age gracefully while others struggle? The answer, it seems, is not a secret. It is not a pill or a program or a single discovery. It is a collection of patterns, woven together over a lifetime. Eat mostly whole foods, especially plants. Move your body regularly, in ways that are sustainable and enjoyable. Maintain connections with other people. Find ways to rest and restore. Pay attention to your environment. Listen to what your body tells you. Adapt as you change. These are not exciting recommendations. They will not generate headlines or sell products. But they have the advantage of being true, or at least as true as anything in this complex field can be. They are the patterns that appear again and again in the lives of people who live long and well. There is no guarantee. No one can promise that following these patterns will prevent disease or extend life. The world is too complex, and chance plays too large a role. But the patterns do offer something valuable, a way of living that is consistent with how the body was designed to function. They offer the satisfaction of participating in your own health, rather than simply waiting to see what happens. For those who have reached the later decades of life, this is not about starting over. It is about building on what is already there. It is about noticing what works and doing more of it. It is about letting go of what no longer serves. It is about approaching each day with the same curiosity and attention that you would bring to any worthwhile conversation. The conversation between body and mind, between self and world, between today and all the tomorrows that may come. This conversation is ongoing. It has been happening since your first breath, and it will continue until your last. The goal is not to control it or master it. The goal is simply to participate, with awareness and with grace. And that, perhaps, is enough. The question we began with was simple. Why do some people age gracefully while others struggle? The answer, we have seen, is not a secret formula or a single discovery. It is a collection of patterns of eating, moving, resting, connecting, and paying attention. These patterns do not guarantee anything. Life is too complex for guarantees. But they offer something perhaps more valuable, a way of living that aligns with how the body was designed to function. If this conversation has sparked something in you, a question, a memory, a new way of seeing your own health, we would be honored if you shared it in the comments. What patterns have you noticed in your own life? What has changed over the years? And what has remained steady? There are more conversations waiting in this library, more wisdom to explore together. If you would like to continue this journey, we invite you to subscribe so that each new chapter finds its way to you. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.